Today in Washington, D.C., there was lots and lots of swearing. It was not random swearing. I don't even think it was swearing in anger. It actually makes sense why there was swearing, but still, a ton of swearing. Did you see this?
Look what your sales team was saying about Timberwolf. Boy, that Timberwolf was one deal. They sold that deal.
This email was from the head of the division, not the sales force.
Whatever it was, it's an internal Goldman document.
This was an email to me in late June.
Right, and you sold
the
Timberwolf.
Transaction.
No, you sold Timberwolf after as well.
We did trades after that.
Yeah, okay. It's the trades after.
Some context.
Yeah, might
be helpful.
The context. Let me tell you, the context is mighty clear. June 22 is the date of this email. Boy, that Timberwolf was one deal. How much of that deal did you sell to your clients after June 22, 2007?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know the answer to that, but the price would have reflected levels that they wanted to invest.
Oh, of course, but they don't know you didn't tell them you thought it was a deal?
Well, I didn't say that.
No. Who did? Your people, internally. You knew it was a deal, and that's what your email shows.
To be a fly on the wall at C-SPAN headquarters when that was going down on live TV today, right? Wow, that was Democratic Senator Carl Levin making a point to a very, very slippery Goldman Sachs witness about whether or not Goldman knowingly sold something that they knew was... That's basically the heart of the big, complicated SEC fraud case against Goldman Sachs. It's about whether or not they knowingly sold people something they knew was going to go kablooey, because there was a way to profit from things going kablooey as long as Goldman could trick some poor schlubs into believing that what they were selling wasn't actually going to go kablooey at all. It was pure gold. It's all dressed up in fancy Wall Street quantitative language, but essentially it was an age-old scam. The kind of thing for which regulation was invented, to force some transparency into the marketplace so people know what they're buying. And so people selling stuff are forced to compete without tricking their customers. Wall Street's allergy to transparency was on display today in exchanges like this one between that same former Goldman Sachs official and Democratic Senator Mark Pryor.
You have a responsibility to tell them what your positions are?
No.
Why not?
Market makers are going to have positions all the time, and that's not something that is a responsibility of a market maker to tell your counterparties at all times how you're positioned.
But why not? Shouldn't there be more transparency there?
That's a prospective question or a current question?
Either way.
Well, currently that's not an obligation.
So the way things are now, we don't have to tell anybody anything. If we know it's toxic waste, we can sell it as baby formula. What's the problem? It's the market. Having Goldman Sachs officials in front of a Senate committee today, having exchanges like that, having them admit stuff like that, was an opportunity for every senator, left, right, and center, to show off just how displeased they are with Goldman's practices, just how disgusted they are on behalf of their constituents.
Goldman's actions demonstrate that it often saw its clients not as valuable customers, but as objects for its own profit.
It's gambling. Pure and simple, raw gambling. You are chasing compensation. You are chasing your colleagues in other investment banks. And you're trying to make a killing.
These halls are full of folks who have come before Senate committees and said, well, everybody was doing it. So I don't think the everybody doing it thing is going to hold up real well.
There's no doubt their behavior was unethical, and the American people will render a judgment as well as the courts.
Bipartisan. Both sides equally disturbed by what passes for investment banking on Wall Street now. When's the last time you saw something bipartisan in the Senate? Consensus, right? What sort of action should be taken as a result?
You got no regrets? You ought to have plenty of regrets. I don't think that you're willing to acknowledge them, but You ought to have them. I don't think you will acknowledge them. That's why we got to do some regulation.
That's why we got to do some regulation, says Carl Levin. But it wasn't just the Democrats saying that today. It was Republicans, too.
Clearly, this system must be reformed so that Wall Street banks are not seen and do not act as unscrupulous operators who seek to profit from the public's misfortune.
Republican Senator Susan Collins, clearly this system must be reformed. The system must be reformed. Both Democrats and Republicans billboarding that message over the Goldman Sachs hearings today. The difference, though, for all the bipartisan agreement and bipartisan complaint, the difference between Democrats and Republicans on this issue, though, is that while that hearing was going on and everybody in a bipartisan way was complaining and damning Goldman Sachs and talking about how much reform is needed, while that was happening, Democrats actually voted for Wall Street reform and Republicans all voted against it. For the second day in a row, the United States Senate did not just whine about the need for Wall Street reform, they held a vote on it. They held a vote on whether or not to begin debate on a Wall Street reform bill. And for the second day in a row, every single Republican, along with Democrat Ben Nelson, we'll get to him later, voted no. And Wall Street reform was blocked from moving forward. That's the really odd political dynamic that's happening in Washington right now. Even as everybody tries to claim the political mantle of being against the demon Wall Street, Republicans continue to vote against new regulations for Wall Street. They're filibustering new regulations for Wall Street. And Democrats continue to vote for new regulations. Yesterday, Democrats held the first vote on Wall Street reform, and every Republican voted to filibuster and voted no. What did Democrats do next? As you saw, today they decided to hold another vote on Wall Street reform, and again, every Republican voted to filibuster, voted no. I'm guessing if Democrats could find a way to hold these votes every 5 minutes, they probably would, because every time they do, it puts Democrats on record against Wall Street banks who don't want new regulations, and it puts Republicans right there with Wall Street. To that end, Democrats have reportedly already scheduled a third vote on the issue for tomorrow at noon. For all the peacocking that Republicans got to do in a hearing like the Goldman Sachs one today, for as much as they tried to get right alongside Democrats to really be seen to go after Goldman, look at the Associated Press headline that crossed the wires right in the middle of that hearing today. This was the headline, quote, "For a second day in a row, Senate Republicans block action on financial regulation bill." If Democrats have finally found their political mojo, and it seems like they might have on this issue, expect them to schedule as many votes as possible to get as many of those headlines as possible for as long as the GOP is willing to keep handing them to them. Joining us now is Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. He is a member of the Senate Banking Committee. Senator Brown, thanks very much for your time tonight.
Glad to be back, Rachel. Thanks.
So does this just happen indefinitely now? Every day Republicans filibuster Wall Street reform and Democrats say, hey, look, they're filibustering Wall Street reform. Does this just happen indefinitely? Where does it end?
Well, it ends when some number of Republicans just get too embarrassed. There's an old saying, don't tell me what you believe, show me what you do. And I think that there's a number of Republicans that just can't keep doing this when they're in the ballot in 2010 or maybe even when they're in the ballot in 2012. And they know that they can do all the showiness they want in committee and they can talk tough at home. But in the end, they protect their Wall Street friends. They protect their big bank Wall Street buddies. And eventually, we're going to do this day after day. We're probably tomorrow night going to stay all night and just continue to do this until we break some of them free. Then we'll have real votes on the floor. This is, Rachel, this is just to have the vote. This is just to have the debate on the Senate floor. This has nothing to do with final passage yet. So we just want to put it out there and then start the amendments. Some of us have some very good strengthening amendments. Some are not so good, and we'll see what happens.
To that end, on the issue of whether or not Republicans are going to continue to hold out in a unified bloc, there is some very late reporting tonight from just moments before we went on the air that your Republican colleague from Ohio, Senator Voinovich, may switch his vote tomorrow and support a vote to move debate forward on this bill. Do you have any reaction to that late breaking news?
Yeah, Senator Voinovich is more independent than the average Republican, and he's voted for the unemployment and the COBRA extension a couple of weeks ago. He breaks with them from time to time. I know he's frustrated with this. He doesn't buy into this. He was very critical of the Republican Party with an editorial board meeting at the Columbus Dispatch a few months ago, and he said that